Welcome to the second JustRPG.com podcast. I'm James, and today I am joined yet again by Jim.
What's up, guys?
All right, and today we are going to start out by talking about our question of the week, which this week is, what is the golden age of RPGs? Then we're going to move on to news about Persona 5. Then we're going to talk about this week's games of the week, which were Persona 3 and Persona 4. If you would like to follow along with the podcast, you can click the video description links below. If not, then you can go to JustRPG.com, then hit the tab that says podcast, and there'll be a post there breaking down the podcast with links to the other articles that we're talking about. If you haven't been to our site before, please check it out. We have hundreds of great reviews for JRPGs, RPGs, all that stuff, for tons of systems going back to Super Nintendo. We also post a couple news articles a week and do some editorials. You can also follow us on Twitter at JustRPG to keep up to date with what we're up to. And we're also game collectors, and we post our game pickups on Twitter. All right, so let's start the first topic. What was the golden age of RPGs?
Huh.
Well, let's break down each generation so we know what we're talking about here.
All right.
We did not include some of the older systems like the Ataris. So like there were a couple RPGs in there, but there weren't enough to really warrant
Not to talk
mention.
about.
Yeah, but we're gonna start with Generation 3, which was the NES and the Master System. Generation 4, which was the Super Nintendo, the original Game Boy, the Mega Drive, also known as the Genesis in the States, and then the Game Gear. Then in Generation 5 was the N64, Game Boy Color, Sega Saturn, and the PlayStation 1. Generation 6 was the Xbox, the GameCube, Game Boy Advanced, the Dreamcast, and the PS2. Generation 7, which was the Xbox 360, Nintendo Wii, Nintendo DS, the PlayStation 3, and the PSP. And then Generation 8, which is the current generation, which includes the Xbox One, the Wii U, the 3DS, the PS4, and the PlayStation Vita. All right,
Oof.
so why don't we start with kind of naming a few games and giving the lowdown of what each generation was like. So first we have the NES and the Master System.
Sure.
So the NES was kind of where it all began. We have like the first Final Fantasies. We have Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest, which is known in Japan. We got the Ultima games. We got Zelda. We got all that kind of stuff. In the Master System, we got Phantasy Star. There was a Yiz game, Dragon Crystal, stuff like that. So, Jim, what did you think of this generation? You had an NES as a
Well,
kid, right?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, most of the RPGs from back then were all turn-based. I think I played Yiz was the first game I came across that was action, and that was on
Huh.
Super Nintendo. I
Yeah.
mean, you could say like Zelda or like Highlight or something like that was an RPG. I guess it was, but most of them, all the Final Fantasies, Fantasy Star back then was turn-based. It wasn't action.
Yeah. I think
Uh,
all of them before the
Shining Force.
GameCube one were turn-based.
Uh, so that's not my personal favorite type of RPG. So I really wasn't into them back then. Even on Super Nintendo and Genesis, I really didn't. I didn't start getting into RPGs until much later.
But would you
And re-
consider it more of a golden age, or is this really just like the primitive beginnings of RPGs?
yeah, they're still good games, very solid. I know you like Super Nintendo RPGs, but I would just consider them more primitive, just starting out, just seeing what the formula can really do.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree. I'm gonna have to say that like the NES, the Master System, they had a few RPGs, and this is where they like kind of invented that turn-based formula where you go out on a world map and you have objectives and you're going here, going there. Even like games like Zelda, it's kind of like, in my opinion, like very primitive on this system. Um,
Hmm.
I'm gonna have to blame it on technology at the time. Like there were battery saves and stuff like that in a few of these games, but not all of them were password based, stuff like that. I think
Yeah.
making a game like that was probably hard back then. I think it was difficult. and that's why they didn't really like try to go too far with it. And I think it was the technology was probably very limiting. Like you can only have
Sure.
so much space on this NES
Sure.
cart, you know.
Yeah,
Well, well,
definitely.
well, well, maybe if they actually filled those NES carts with a full board, maybe they would have had more room. But
Yeah, definitely. It definitely came down to memory. There's a lot that goes into RPGs, and you really just couldn't do that. You
yeah,
couldn't do that much back then with it.
yeah. I mean, even when you get to more advanced, oh, let's stop there. Let's go move on to the next generation then. All right. So the next generation was Generation 4, which again was the Super Nintendo, the original Game Boy, the Genesis or Mega Drive, and the Game Gear. In my opinion, I think this is where they kind of took the previous generation, the NES and the Mega Drive, and they took what they did there, like those turn-based RPGs, like the original Final Fantasy, and they kind of continued that. They like picked that up. They're like, okay, now we got more space. We got more room on the cart. We can do some more stuff in terms of like graphics and sound. Let's take this RPG formula that sold on the NES and we just improve it and put it on a new console. And,
Yeah.
and then we got stuff like
Yeah.
Final Fantasy 2, Final Fantasy 3, Chrono Trigger even kind of mixed it up a little bit. But it was more or
A little
less like
bit.
very similar to the previous generation.
Yeah, it was mostly just an upgrade in like graphic sound, like you said. The magic effects look cooler, things like that. But it was still, I think, mostly the same game.
Well, there were some different games, kind of like Secret of Mana. Kind of was like
Sure.
one of
That
the
was like a good
earlier,
RPG.
yeah, action
Action
RPGs.
RPG. Yeah.
Even like Final Fantasy Legend, which I believe is the same series as Secret of Mana, just renamed for the U.S. market, was
Mhm.
had that kind of style to it. And there were also
Yeah, that was
some.
good.
They also added like tactics games in this generation. We have stuff like Shining Force 2, super awesome game. Game Gear had a Shining Force, stuff like that. Kind of, I can see the RPG market starting to expand here. They're like, whoa, people like this shit.
Oh yeah,
Let's do these.
that's definitely when RPGs took off. Well, that's when they started to take off. I don't think it was until really Final Fantasy VII where really RPGs got popular, mainstream popular.
Well, if stuff like Final Fantasy 3 and Chrono Trigger, I think were pretty mainstream. I mean, I don't remember.
Uh,
I was pretty young. I was
I don't
born
think
in '90,
they were
so
not mainstream. Definitely not.
okay.
They were popular in their genre.
Yeah, actually, there's also got stuff like Pokemon this generation too. Again,
Yeah, on
turn-based,
handhelds.
kind of same thing. But yeah, that's also a good point. Something worth mentioning is that handhelds also had RPGs this time. Like I mentioned, Final Fantasy Legend, Pokemon, Dragon Warrior 3 was on Game Boy. You could also like take these RPGs with you when you leave the house. You weren't like stuck at home playing Final Fantasy 3 or Chrono Trigger. You could go with your RPGs.
Yeah,
Now,
Pokemon really helped.
yeah, I think Pokemon really kind of brought that. But a lot of people don't think RPG when they think Pokemon. I think they kind of think of it as its own thing, like its own category. But it really is an RPG. It's turn-based RPG.
Yeah, I never really thought about it, but I guess you're right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said, it's kind of hard to associate the two because it's became so much of its own thing and spawned its own game type almost. Like there are games that copy Pokemon.
Yeah, I mean,
You
if
know?
someone says they like Pokemon, it doesn't mean they like RPGs.
Yeah, that's
Like
definitely true.
they don't play any RPGs except Pokemon. I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Well, would you consider this the golden age? We got all these new games. We got even new styles of RPGs coming around. What do you
No,
think?
not me personally, anyway. And I don't think in general, even if I like turn-based more, I would still say it got better.
I'd say it's definitely an improvement. There are definitely a lot of games. A lot of games came out here. A lot of good games came out here. I'd say it's definitely in the running. I'd say
Yeah,
if not the best, it's going to be pretty close.
yeah. It got better a little bit.
All right, then why don't we move on to the next generation? It would be Generation 5, which was, again, the Nintendo 64, the Nintendo Game Boy Color, the Sega Saturn, if you remember that, and
Uh-huh.
the original PlayStation 1, or PSX as it's also known.
Right.
Now here, we see Nintendo in the past, as we just mentioned, had the Final Fantasies, it had Chrono Trigger, Super Mario RPG, it had Pokemon, all that stuff. And really on Genesis, what do you have? You had Phantasy Star, you had Shining Force, and like a few others. But here in Generation 5, we see kind of a shift. Nintendo 64 really had like barely any. We had
I say zero. I don't think it had any RPGs. I mean, sure.
It had a few. It had Paper Mario, which is fantastic, but a little different. It kind of it is an RPG, and it's probably the most RPG-esque of all the Paper Mario RPG games, except for the original. But we have that. We have Quest 64, which is horrible. All right. We have the Zelda games, which technically are action RPGs. And then there's an obscure game, probably no one here has ever heard of it, is Ogre Battle 64. That was a non-grid kind of tactics game that brought in RPG kind of almost turn-based battles, but you didn't really control, but pretty obscure. So really, we had like maybe 5-6 games out of like 296 on the console.
I think the only one you didn't mention. What was that one game that fucking crashed all the time?
Oh, Aiden Chronicles.
Aiden Chronicles,
I have that game. It crashes every 10 minutes while you're playing. You actually have to avoid battles because the game will crash. So I can't believe they released that on the cart.
Yeah,
I've never blue screened playing a cart before. A legitimate cart, it was weird.
Yeah, but basically all the RPGs on this whole generation came out on one system.
Yeah, well, there were, again, a handful on the Saturn, but how many people can really name Saturn games easily? There's not many. It's not even... Sega's basically dying out now.
Yeah, well, it really came out of the PlayStation.
It definitely was the PlayStation. We do have a couple more on Game Boy Color, like Pokemon Gold and Silver again, more Pokemon. We're going to have that in every generation from now on. Link's Awakening, DX, they had one on the regular Game Boy that wasn't DX. And River King, like there were a few on Game Boy Color, but nothing like grand scale fantastic. Game Boy Color was still pretty primitive at the time. But yeah, like you said, PlayStation is where everything ended up. We got Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, Legend of Dragoon, Chrono Cross, Tales of Destiny 2, Xenogears, Suikoden, Wild Arms, like Grandia, all of these games were on PS1.
Yeah, a lot of classics, a lot of very, very good games.
I think that, at least in our generation, everyone growing up, when they think RPG, they think of Final Fantasy VII. That was their first real RPG experience. Some kids might have had the Super Nintendo and Nintendo, and like you said, maybe they weren't as mainstream back then, but when Final Fantasy came out, Final Fantasy VII came out, that's when everyone had that game.
Epic RPG where anybody who didn't matter if you didn't play video games, you were into that story, you cared about the characters. It really made RPGs mainstream, especially Final Fantasy.
Yeah, I can't. If you told me someone had a PlayStation 1 when it was relevant and didn't play Final Fantasy 7, I'd be very surprised.
Yeah, even if they didn't like RPGs.
Really the game.
Yeah.
That's also where we see 3D coming in. Like really, before this, we did have some 3D games on the Super Nintendo, but not real 3D. No polygons, nothing like that. This is when 3D kind of became doable for developers, which I think is why Nintendo 64, for example, like didn't have too many RPGs like that, because it was hard to do that 3D well. So I think people who made games for that were kind of going for more like simple, here's an engine, it runs, we're just going to throw some skins on it, and that's it. With an RPG, you got to do some more work. You got to, it's not easy to make that. You're going to spend a year or more developing that game.
Yeah. I mean, also, N64 used carts, so you can't really fit that much onto them.
That's a good point.
And there's a big reason to not make games for it, not make RPGs for it. Unless you want to, Quest 64.
Yeah, it seems like everyone who was willing to put that development time into games were like, all right, we'll do it on the PlayStation. They got discs, we can fit more on them, we can run with this.
Yeah,
also
that really
looks
started
better.
the whole cinematic thing.
You didn't have to do internal batteries for PS1. You know, I think it was just easier and cheaper to develop for it than it was for N64 and the other stuff.
Yeah, especially bigger games like RPGs.
Now,
Absolutely.
since this is when the 3D became like popular, I feel like they had a lot of issues to work through. Like if you played Final Fantasy VII as a kid, you're like, wow, this looks awesome. Same with like Ocarina of Time. When I played Ocarina of Time as a kid, I'm like, oh my god, this is real life. It looks amazing.
Yeah.
But now when I go back and look at that, I'm like, oh my god, this is atrocious.
Well,
It
it's not
definitely
great.
did not age as well as the sprites did in Super Nintendo era, Genesis era.
Sprites are timeless.
Yeah, like right now you can play Final Fantasy 3 and you're ready to go. Like, wow, this looks cool. I like these sprites. It's good. But if you plug in, an N64 or PS1 game, you're like, oh my god, how did I play this?
I don't think that. I don't think that. I mean, honestly, Final Fantasy, their hands and their like horses' hooves. That kills me. It kills me when I look at that.
It really does kill me too. I mean, I can get over it and I can play those games, but they really don't look good at all.
Well, I think Final Fantasy like 9 especially looks so good.
That's probably actually personally, I'm not a big fan of 7. I definitely prefer 9.
Yeah, well, me too, but
I think that was the appropriate art and graphical direction for that time period. Let's do something more storybook-esque, what I'm like, more drawn than these polygons, because these polygons don't look great, Let's go with something that's gonna age better. I have it's still not amazing, but I have a much easier time playing like Final Fantasy 7 than I do Final Fantasy 9 instead of 7. You know what I mean?
just because of the graphics, or
Because of the graphics, yeah. I think it just aged better.
yeah.
So, would you consider this the golden age of RPGs? We've got a lot of new ones in PS1.
I think you're getting closer, but not quite there yet.
I'm gonna have to agree. I'd say, yeah, PlayStation was great. We got a lot of games on here, but since the other systems were so lacking in the RPG department, I really have a hard time calling this the golden age. Sure, if you move PS1 back to the previous generation, oh yeah, takes the cake. That'd be the best generation. But since we have so basically disappointment in the Nintendo department, Sega again we have barely mentioned. I really think it was lacking.
Saturn.
I mean, what is there to say about the Saturn?
I mean, yeah,
I mean,
not a whole lot.
if you can remember it, then you're on your own, All right, why don't we move on to the next generation? Generation 6, which was the Xbox, the GameCube, the Game Boy Advance, Sega Dreamcast, their last system, and the Sony PlayStation 2.
hmm
Now here we have a lot of RPGs, a lot of games.
Yeah, it's
got,
really hard to talk about RPGs and not bring up something from this generation or something about this generation. This is like,
I mean,
you
really, on every console, we have some very notable RPGs.
yeah,
We got even on Xbox. You definitely, most people probably don't associate Xbox with RPGs, but they had quite a few. They had Knights of the Old Republic, Star Wars game, Fable, Shenmue
Morrowind,
2,
one of my favorites.
Morrowind. Even X-Men Legends was basically an RPG.
yeah.
And then GameCube, we got, again, not a super heavy focus by Nintendo on RPGs, but we got a lot of very good ones. We got,
Yeah, some of my favorite of all time.
yeah, we got Tales of Symphonia. Custom Robo had very heavy RPG elements. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, while not the best game, was pretty good at the time. Bit in Kados and was it Lost Kingdoms, kind of card game RPGs.
Love Lost Kingdoms, yeah.
We got a full-fledged 3D Fire Emblem game, Path of Radiance.
Yeah.
Then we got a real true sequel to Paper Mario, which was Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door. Like that was a true, when we got the Wii, we got kind of different play style. If you've played any of the more recent Paper Mario games, you're probably very disappointed. But the one on GameCube was a real true sequel to the first one.
It's probably better than the first one.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
I
if
like
you
the
take
first one
off
better,
the
but-
nostalgia lens, it's probably, probably a better game.
I think it's a better game.
Even on or we'll do Dreamcast, which while it didn't last long, they had Skies of Arcadia and Shenmue,
First,
Grandia
yeah.
2, Phantasy Star First. They had all those. They also had Record of Lodoss War, pretty good RPG. They didn't have a huge library of RPGs, but they had some really good ones. Like Skies of Arcadia, a lot of these got ported. Like Skies of Arcadia moved to GameCube after the system failed. Shenmue got a sequel on the Xbox. Phantasy Star, there were two Phantasy Stars in Dreamcast. They combined them, made them one game, and put it on GameCube. Even Dreamcast had some worth mentioning.
Sure.
And then handheld department, we have the Game Boy Advanced, right? We have Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced, Minish Cap for Zelda, Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, Golden Sun, which is a fantastic series. If anyone's ever played it, you know.
Too. Yeah, that's turn-based.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I love Golden Sun. The art is amazing in that game. For Game Boy Advance, it's
the best-looking game on Game Boy. Yeah. It's
and then
beautiful.
we had 2 U.S. Fire Emblem games. There were some in Japan as well. We got, again, more Pokemon. Even the handheld is fantastic here. And then we have the King. We have the PlayStation 2. I have almost like 100 PS2 games now. Half of them are RPGs over there. Like there are a lot of RPGs there.
It's hard not to.
It's pretty dangerous collecting for the PS2 if you like RPGs. You're going to end up spending a lot of money. There's a lot of good games there. We got Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy 12. They even put 11 on there, but why would you play it on your PS2? We got some games we're talking about later, like Persona 3 and Persona 4. We got Dragon Quest 8, which was an amazing game.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, we got Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. They even put Chain of Memories, which was also on Game Boy Advance. They put that on PS2. We got the Dark Cloud series.
I mean, it's really the juggernaut of RPGs, of games in general. It has the most games on it of any console. It's the gaming console of all time.
Yeah, I put it up there. We even got stuff like Xenosaga, which were like grand scale, really good games. Odin Sphere, which were kind of more mixed up, actiony RPGs. Same with Star Ocean. Rogue Galaxy was pretty neat, kind of a hidden gem.
Yeah.
How many people heard of that?
It was a late release.
Yeah. They put a lot of Suikoden games, Wild Arms. There's a lot of games on PS2.
Yeah, you can go on and on PS2. It's crazy.
Something about this generation, too, is I think from the previous generation, which again was like N64, Saturn, PlayStation 1, Game Boy Color, there was a big increase in technology here. Like if you look at a PS2 game and then look at a PS1 game, it's like night and day. It's a pretty big difference. GameCube looks fantastic for the time, especially when they went with like kind of more the cell shaded. Yeah. That I think that looks amazing on the GameCube. I think that was kind of their like peak.
Yeah. Definitely.
And then we got pretty much it's got a memory card. They don't have to worry about that. Everything's disc-based except for the Game Boy Advance, obviously, but everything else is disc-based. We don't have we can't really develop for this one because it's cartridge. No. It's all...
They're DVDs now, too, so you can fit a shit ton more of stuff in them. I mean, there were still multiple DVD RPGs.
Yes, there were. Yeah. This is a pretty big boy generation over here.
I mean, really
a lot of good games.
I don't think RPGs have really improved too much since then. I think the graphics got better, the sound got better, but they haven't really gotten that bigger. They haven't changed too much since then.
Yeah, here we see a large variety. We have action RPGs, we have tactics games like Disgaea, we have the traditional turn-based games. We got ones that are kind of hybrids. I think there's a lot going on here. I think this is, in my opinion, where they kind of like peaked in terms of ideas.
Yeah.
Like after this, you can improve graphics, you can improve sound, you can make the games larger, even though they really haven't done too much in that regard. I'm sure there's some exceptions, but in terms of like the overworlds, they're pretty set.
I mean, yeah.
So would you consider this the golden age?
Probably, yeah. I'd have to. I think.
Yeah, I mean, we'll look at the other ones. We'll break them down too, but so far, I think this is the winner, in my opinion. All right, let's move on to the next generation, which is Generation 7. We got the Xbox 360, the Wii, the DS, PlayStation 3, and the PSP. On the 360, we got stuff like Mass Effect, more Skyrim, more Elder Scrolls like Skyrim. We got Oblivion there as well. Tales of Vesperia. But otherwise, for the 360, that's about it. There's not too many. There are some multiplats.
There are, but yeah.
Like the Fable, I think, were on PC. And so, like, there's a lot of multiplats on 360, but it's not too many more. It's not really. No, I mean, the Xbox wasn't either, but there were a few. It's kind of like the same deal here with the 360.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got the Wii, Nintendo Wii. Again, kind of not too many RPGs on here. We got Xenoblade. We got the Pandora's Tower. What was that other one in that series that they did?
Last Story.
We got another Fire Emblem game, but not too... Really, I was kind of surprised when I found out there was a Fire Emblem game. I didn't really know about it. Maybe it wasn't marketed well. We got
They never are.
Yeah, it's
They
true.
never were. Now they are.
We got some other kind of weird ones like Muramasa. Does have like some heavy RPG elements, but it's more like kind of action-y game with like RPG elements in the background. So
Yeah, definitely.
while the games we mentioned here were good, there really weren't too many others either.
I mean, I think this is where games started to do that, where they have like RPG elements to things. I don't remember a whole lot of games on the last generation, the PS2, GameCube, Xbox.
Yeah, they were
Where they
either
would do
like
that.
full-fledged. I'm sure there's some exceptions that we're not thinking of, but they were either like this is an RPG or this is not an RPG.
Yeah, this generation, or yeah, what was it, seventh generation, has a lot of games where it's it's a first person, like Borderlands, RPG element twist
Yep.
thing. A lot of games came out. Even well, I guess Grand Theft Auto always had stats you can upgrade.
Yeah, but it was kind of like a background thing. But
Yeah, but now it's gotten more full fledged. A lot more games like that is what I'm saying.
all right, well, we also have the PS3 here, which is actually where we're going to see probably the most RPGs. Maybe not, but we have stuff like even Demon Souls is very RPG-esque. Ni no Kuni, a very good game that we actually both played pretty recently. We love that game. Valkyria Chronicles, we got some tactics. We got the new Final Fantasy was at the time was 13. Dragon's Crown, which kind of was like a beat 'em up with RPG elements. And we got a bunch of Tales games like Tales of Graces, Tales of Xillia, Xillia 2, etc. They ported Symphonia and stuff like that.
There's a lot of Tales games on PS3. God.
Another thing to note for PS3 is most games are not region locked. So if you were a real JRPG fan and they weren't in the US, you could get the Japanese version, and you could muddle your way through a guide, or if you know Japanese, it'd be no problem. But the fact that it wasn't region locked kind of lets you do that. I personally don't like when they region lock consoles. Like, why bother? But I guess they have some reason for it. But PS3, I think they were smart by doing that. They're like, let the JRPG fans who know Japanese or who will try it anyway, let them buy our games.
Sure.
I think that was a good.
It's hard to do
good
with
move.
RPGs, though. It's a lot easier to do
Yeah.
with, say, shoot 'em ups or something like that.
Yeah, that's true. All right.
There's a whole lot of people. Yeah.
Now we'll move on to the handheld generation. We had the DS and the PSP. Both had a ton of RPGs, actually. In my opinion, this is really the generation where I think RPGs are starting to shift from these large home consoles to handhelds, like we have for DS. There's too many to count, but we got a ton of ports. We got The World Ends With You, which is a fantastic game.
Another one of my
Contact.
favorites,
We had a Phantasy Star. We got more Pokemon, of course. We got more Zelda, 2 Zelda games. They ported Chrono Trigger. There's a ton of RPGs on DS to play. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to get them all. There's so many.
Yeah.
And even on PSP, we got like a Final Fantasy Tactics. We got Kingdom Hearts. We got a port of Valkyrie Profile, which they remastered. Wild Arms XF, Joan of Arc. There's a ton of Tactics games on PSP that are worth playing. There's a lot of games RPG wise on these handhelds.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So-
I feel
so-
like the DS is kind of like the PS2 of
Yeah,
handhelds.
yeah,
As
I
far
mean-
as that goes.
Again, PS3 did have a lot, but I mean these handhelds really kind of picked up the slack, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Now, for my opinion, for the console generation overall, Definitely not the golden age. I think it's actually starting to fall off here. Yeah, well, we have a lot of these handheld stuff, which is great. Every other system is pretty much lacking. The Wii, the 360. Again, the PS3 is almost an exception, but there weren't too many. I think it's kind of overall starting to fall off. I think it's starting to shift more to handheld. Well, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, if we're including handhelds, I think this is
Yeah,
a very
definitely.
strong generation for RPGs. I mean, it still is. I think there's a lot of ones on, like you said, PS3. I like the Wii ones. There's only a few of them, but they're good. Even like little obscure like Hapuna is a really good RPG. It's
Hmm.
a weird one though.
So, is this
It's
the
got some
golden age
stuff.
for you?
Well, no, last one was. This
Yeah.
is good stuff too. I like this. I like the whole add RPG elements into things, but keep the gameplay solid. So like I liked Borderlands a lot because it was a really solid first person shooter and you upgrade yourself and stuff. So I like that a lot actually. And this is really where it started to take off.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. I guess it's because I'm not a big fan of like shooters and stuff like that. But
Well, I mean anything, even like action games.
but I actually maybe I'll have to change it. But I will admit that I would never have played Borderlands if there weren't RPG elements. I did try it because it did have it, and that was really the only reason why I gave it a chance. And I
Right.
did enjoy myself for a couple hours, then I kind of got bored and forgot about it. But yeah, that is definitely a good point. But Golden Age, I don't think so. I don't think so. All right, why don't we move on to the last generation, the current one, which is Generation 8. We have the Xbox One, the Wii U, the 3DS, PS4, and the Vita. Xbox One, I actually had a pretty hard time finding RPGs to put on the list for this one. We have The Witcher 3, we have Fallout 4, and Dark Souls 3, which are all pretty much on something else. But that's really it. I can't think of many other Xbox One RPGs. Can you?
Yeah, no, I have no idea.
Same with the Wii U. The Wii U has a couple. We have Xenoblade Chronicles X, which was fantastic in my opinion. We have the Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, which for some reason is the only one they put on the console. Now that is not a
It's not
full-fledged
really an
RPG,
RPG. Yeah.
but it does have those RPG elements where you're grinding gear and
Kind of
getting,
feels like an RPG.
yeah. Tokyo Mirage Sessions, which I have not played yet, but I heard it was pretty good. And then we got some ports. We got Wind Waker HD, Twilight Princess HD, and that's about it. There's not too many games on
Yeah.
Wii U, and that's about it. Um, then we got the PS4, where again there are a couple, but I feel like this generation overall is kind of slow with putting out games. We have like Bloodborne, um, Odin Sphere got a redo. Destiny has got some RPG in it. We got a Tales of Zestiria, which is also on
Well, that's
PS3.
yeah. I was gonna say it's last gen
And
too.
then there's Fairy Fencer F. Well, there are a few, and they look
That's
fantastic on the PS4 and the Xbox One. There's really not too many to speak of here.
yeah. I mean, RPGs are always slow to come out. They take a
Yeah.
while. But
Which
yeah,
and then we got the handhelds again, which in my opinion, we see the trend from last generation continuing. The 3DS and the Vita, there are a ton of RPGs on these two systems. Like if you're an RPG fan, really,
it's
I'd
mostly
say,
there.
yeah, currently, get a 3DS, get a Vita. You know, we got Pokemon, we got like 3 Monster Hunter games, we got Zelda Link Between Worlds, which is one of the best Zelda games we ever played. We got Xenoblade, got a port to the 3DS. I know you're not a fan, but we got Bravely Default and Bravely Second, which I thought were pretty good.
Yeah,
Then we got
they're okay.
Shin Megami Tensei 4 over here. There's a lot on 3DS. There's a bunch more that I didn't name, but there's a lot on here.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be where the market's going for RPGs
Yeah,
is
it's definitely interesting
quick play.
from our
Yeah,
perspective since we do these reviews and talk about this all the time. But it seems to be like a shift. There seems to be a clear shift of RPGs from these home consoles to the handhelds. Maybe it's development costs. They're like, hey, we can make a game on 3DS that has a great story. It can be pretty long, and we don't have to spend the big money like we would if we're going to develop on PS4. Maybe there's something to do with that.
I mean, like I said, in like PS2 era stuff, the gameplay really didn't change that much, and that's basically what a Vita and a 3DS are capable of doing. Like PS2 stuff, maybe a little bit better.
I'd say Vita's more like PS3,
Well, yeah, Vita is pretty powerful, but like
but
that's
3DS, yeah, is kind of like it's almost I'd say GameCube era. It's not as it doesn't look as good as GameCube in most respects,
sure.
but I think the quality of games are kind of similar to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much else to do with RPG, like solid, like normal RPGs, not Skyrim, not like big
Hmm.
open world stuff. Normal
Traditional
traditional
RPGs,
RPG.
yeah,
Yeah, there's not a
yeah,
whole lot to do with that, so you can probably fit it on a whole cartridge, a modern cartridge.
yeah, yeah. I think that's what's happening here. Is I think we're seeing because of development costs and because there's not too many more innovations, at least that we've seen recently. It seems like it's just easier for them to develop on these handhelds, especially the 3DS. Vita does have some, especially JRPGs, but yeah, 3DS is really where it's at.
Well, it's super popular. Everyone wants to develop for it.
All right, well, I think the verdict's in. I'm gonna have to go with Generation 6 here, which is the Xbox, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, Dreamcast, PS2. What about you?
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah. I think it's if it only had just the sheer amount of RPGs that it did. I mean, I think that's really what did it. Is there's countless RPGs on the PS2, while there are still some on the other consoles. Really, in every other generation, we see yeah maybe one, maybe two consoles will have some good RPGs, but overall, some are just like have like five. Like the current one, like Wii U, we got
Yeah.
five. But on Generation 6, we have a bunch of good ones on every system. We got, all across the board. For me, that's really what did it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's easy, I think, an easy decision.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree. All right. Well, I think that concludes the question of the week. Let's now move on to some news. This week, we're going to talk about Persona 5, which, might have, if it was out now, maybe it would change our opinion on the last question. But, all right, let's jump into it.
Well, it's also on the third generation, or third
That's true.
generation. The
Yeah, we'll
seventh
get to that.
generation, so.
So, Persona 5 is coming out in the United States and Europe on Valentine's Day next year. And it's actually coming out soon in Japan. It's going to be September 15th for Japan. I am super excited about this game.
Yeah.
I really liked the other Persona games that were in PS2. And now there's a new one coming out. What Jim hinted at is going to be on PS4 and the PlayStation 3, which I think is a very smart move. I think if it was just PS4, yeah, we might have seen a couple people get a console just for that, but really, I think this is going to make them sell a lot more copies of the game. I think like real, true JRPG fans probably don't have that PS4 yet, So like the fact that you can still play it on your PS3, I think is going to be big for them. I think it's a wise move.
Well, it works out for me. I don't have a PS4.
Yeah, I haven't pulled the trigger yet on that either. So, and I'm not sure this would have made me, but since it is PS3 and PS4, I'm super excited.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it looks awesome. It looks so gorgeous. Like the colors, everything about it. I think you're
Yeah.
playing as like kind of a thief this time.
Yeah. So
which is a cool
the
concept.
the new character designs for this. Well, let me start with this first. Like every other Persona game since PS2 at least, you're a transfer student coming to a new school, and this time
Right.
it's in Shibuya, Japan, which is a real city. This game is actually based on that city. It is a fictional in game, like they designed it differently, but it does have that. Apparently, has the real feel from the real city. But in this
It
game,
looks
instead of
amazing.
yeah, it does look amazing. Instead of like being a weird kind of shoot yourself in the head kind of thing we saw in Persona 3, or the go in the TV thing we saw in Persona 4. In this one, the theme is you're a part of this gang, basically, called the Phantom Thieves of Hearts. And you're basically vigilantes that are running around kind of saving people, but causing a little mischief on the side. I get a very Clockwork Orange feel from the character designs. I don't know about you, but when I see that there's like one character has kind of a like a bat or pipe, and he's got like the mask on. They all kind of have that
Yeah, a little
mischief
kooky.
feel. Yeah.
Eh.
And if you play Persona 4, you probably remember Teddy, that
Yeah.
basically teddy bear character who's like your mascot. This time, It's going to be a cat by the name of Morgana.
Yeah.
I think this cat, I'm assuming is a she, is going to be the one who kind of like organizes your group. You know, so I think that's a kind of a cooler concept. I've liked Teddy in Persona 4, but I think I'm going to like this cat a little more. It looks more, I don't know, more believable. I don't know. I like Teddy, but he was like a goofball. I think this one's going to be more of like a mischief-making cat. It's also supposed to have like this shape-shifting thing. I don't know how that's going to work, but I'm sure we'll see some stuff come out soon. Yeah. All right. Well, like the previous games, there's still these social links, which basically you build relationships out of combat, and that strengthens your persona, which you can summon to help you in battle. So these games are not just pure run through this dungeon crawler, fight, grind. Oh, I need to grind more. You can also, in a way, grind out of combat by going, for example, they're adding this one, fishing. You can go fishing with your friend, and you'll become better friends with that person. That'll make you stronger in combat.
Well, it makes your persona stronger.
Yes. Doesn't affect your personal stats, but it makes your persona more powerful.
Yeah. I really like the social parts of this game. That's actually probably my favorite part about the Persona.
Now,
it's definitely what sets it apart.
Yeah, if I had never played a Persona and you told me this concept, I'd be like, what? I'm not interested in that. It sounds stupid. But after playing it, I'm like, I can't believe I like this. Like, it is very satisfying.
Yeah,
it kind of breaks up the gameplay, too. Like, you don't have to just dungeon crawl the whole time. You feel like you're always working towards making your character more powerful. I think that's a smart move.
Or going out for drinks.
Yeah.
That's actually one of the only games I read the text because it's good.
True.
It's like that's why I'm playing it, kind of.
Yeah. Another interesting part about this game is if you played Persona 3, for example, you kind of were in the same dungeon the whole time and just kind of climbing floors. In Persona 4, you kind of went into themed dungeons. There were multiple ones. In 3, it was just one dungeon. You're just going up. In 4, you were basically kind of pulled into these different worlds, and you'd beat them and move on to the next world over time. In this one, you access these, what they're called palaces, through a phone app in the game. And that kind of sets you to these different areas. Now, in this game, unlike any of the other ones, when you're in these palaces, they have environmental puzzles. So you actually have to kind of do some puzzle solving to progress, which we haven't seen in any other game.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
They also added a stealth mechanic, like you can hide behind like a bench, and when the enemy comes closer, you can press like the action button, and you can jump on top of them, and that gives you the jump on them in battle.
Instead of just like clunkily throwing your sword around, hoping that you get them from behind. Yeah, it just looks a lot more elegant, at least now, a lot more fun.
Also, speaking of combat, in the other one, it's basically you're in a school uniform, and they had more costumes, but they weren't like battle oriented. I think they made the excuse that you have armor under your clothes, but it wasn't really that cool. And 3 also, you're in the school outfit.
No, I thought 3. No, 3 you change your clothes.
You could change your clothes, but they were never like, okay, now I'm wearing armor, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think they did look. Maybe I'm mistaken, but
I think you're mistaken.
Like, you put a new shirt on, you change shirts.
Well, you would change shirts, but it wasn't. You're not wearing like battle clothes.
No.
You're wearing a new tank top. You know, it was like
it would change. In 4, it just didn't change.
Well, in 4, you have like costumes you can change into.
Yeah.
Like you can get like a bathing suit or something, and it'd be like that, but. Whatever. In this one, I think that these kind of vigilante outfits will give you more of that, like, I'm in combat feel. I look like I'm ready for combat, which I think is a good change. There's also there's also a new feature in combat. It's called Hold Up. Kind of goes with the vigilante theme. You apparently, I don't know the complete details in this. I'm not sure if they've been released, but apparently you can speak with the enemy monster and try to get them to join you. Which is a pretty interesting concept. It's kind of new for Persona. Kind of looking forward to that. All right. One other thing to mention with this game is when it starts out, you can choose the difficulty, right? You cannot change that difficulty at all throughout the game.
It's always like that.
Yeah, so you have to kind of be careful what you choose. So these games are not the easy. They're not the hardest, but they're not the easiest.
I mean, it depends on how much you want to grind, really.
Yeah.
If you don't really want to grind, pick easy.
Yep, I definitely agree there. All right, before we wrap this topic up, let's mention one more thing. Is that basically the pre-order numbers for this game in Japan were not so great, and then mainly due because Final Fantasy 15 was being released during the same month, and they actually delayed it in Japan. So after they did that, the pre-order numbers for Persona 5 skyrocketed, which I think is good because since Japan's getting the game first, we'll get to kind of see the stuff they put out, and we'll get a better grasp of that game. But in terms of news, that's about it for Persona 5. So let's move on to the next topic, which is the games of the week. And here we have more Persona. We chose, again, Persona 3 and Persona 4. So why don't we start out with... yeah, right. Let's start out with Persona 3.
All right.
Well, this game, for most people, it was their first Persona game ever.
It was mine, yeah.
Yeah, same here, actually. I've later gone and played the earlier ones, but 3, for me, it kind of seems like the first game.
I've never played the other ones.
Yeah, but a lot of people haven't.
You've played them. Are they good, the other two?
Not nearly as good. Much better on PS2.
They're expensive on PS1. I think they're like $100.
I think it's because of the success of the last two. It kind of made those go up.
Yeah, they're probably very uncommon.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they sold as well. Persona 4, if you don't have it for PS2, is like $15 sealed.
Well, yeah, Persona 3 is the same deal. It really got popular at Persona 3.
Yeah,
Persona
a lot of
3
copies out there.
Deal when it came out. That was like the RPG.
So let's get into like the premise of this one. Again, you're a transfer student. It's kind of the deal with Persona games. It's basically you find out very early on that you have a potential, and that means you're able to use the persona. Now, the really weird part about this game, which I think might have scared off some people, but I think some people stuck with it anyway, was you, as you'll see in the first cutscene of the game, in order to summon your persona, you have to shoot yourself in the head. Now, I don't know about you guys, but this definitely it was odd for me when I first put it in.
That.
I was like, what's going on?
That was a huge selling point for me. When you told
Jim,
me
are you suicidal? I mean, I think it's if you don't know about that, you can get taken back and maybe even turned off pretty easily. But and there's really no explanation for it either. It's just that's the way it is.
Explain it much later in the game.
Yeah.
But like for a while, you're kind of like, why am I shooting myself in the head?
And it's not just in this opening cutscene. It's every time you use your persona, you shoot yourself in the head.
Yeah.
You know, which I kind of says it is a very depressing feel, like the whole time you're playing through it. It's not a happy game. It's definitely a depressing game.
Yeah, it's definitely... I mean, I've only played 2 Personas, but it's definitely the darker of the two. My God.
Yeah, yeah. Now, in this one, again, in terms of difficulty, something you might not know about it is basically revive items are not available in the game. You can't pick up items that revive your party members. If you choose easy mode, in terms of difficulty, you'll get 10 revives, and that's it for the game. You can only use these 10 revive items, and you can never get more. I don't know the exact numbers, but for the other difficulties, but easy is 10, and that's it. All right, then we'll move on to the story. In this one, again, you're a student during the day. You can go around town. You can kind of do what you want during the day, and then at night you go to this place called Tartarus, right? And this is basically a big tower that only appears in what they call the midnight hour, which in the game is midnight at during the evening. So in this one, you basically are only in this tower for combat the entire game, and it more or less looks the same. You're running through these levels, and you just kind of get like as high as you want, but that's it. You're never, okay, now I'm in this new dungeon. No. It's It's
It
Tartarus
never
all
changes.
the whole time. That's it.
The music never changes. It's like the same thing the whole game.
Yep.
All the combat.
And
The
then another
enemies kind
part
of.
of this game is you can't just keep. Let's say like you have full HP. You can't just keep climbing. After a while, your characters get tired, and then they don't perform well in combat, and you basically have to stop. You have to leave.
Yeah, you have
So,
to go back.
so it's kind of unusual, I think, in combat. I kind of got bored of the combat. There's also another thing
Yeah,
is,
pretty basic combat.
yeah, you can only control your main character in this game. You cannot control your other party members. They're all autopilot. And sometimes they don't do what you would expect them to do. You know, they kind of do weird things, like they'll, like if the enemy's weak to fire, they'll use an ice move, what it's immune to, and you're like, what's going on, you know?
For the
that-
most part, they're okay though.
Yeah, it's not game breaking, but it's something worth knowing. You really can't.
Yeah, you don't have that much control.
Yeah, you can't control. There are more. You basically have parties of 4. There are more than 4 characters available, so you kind of have to pick and choose. This is also kind of a weird part. Sometimes those characters go away, like they leave your party, and you can't use them again. So you might have to go, and also you can't level up characters when they're not in your party. So sometimes if this happens to you, you have to go back to lower levels of dungeon, level up that character, and then continue playing.
Mhm.
So it's kind of another weird part of it that I
Yeah.
wasn't a huge fan of.
There are a lot of flaws. I mean, I consider them flaws. I don't like any of this stuff right now, but it's still such a good game. It's
Yeah,
still like
yeah,
so
yeah.
intriguing.
Don't get me wrong here. This game is really good. Especially if you never played it before. I definitely recommend playing it, but
Yeah,
there are some flaws.
it's just some weird designs, and they kind of carried that over into 4 a little bit too. I guess.
Yeah,
we'll talk
I
about
think in
later.
most of these things we're mentioning, they fixed. But for another example is when you're playing the game, there are these events that happen, and in 3, it's kind of based on like you'll play through days. And there's a calendar. Really, something will only happen at the beginning or end of the month, and there's this whole huge chunk in the middle where you're not really, nothing's really going on.
kind of prepping for the beginning and the end of every
Yeah,
month.
but sometimes you're at the point where you're like, all right, I'm ready for something to happen. I'm prepped, and it just isn't happening. But overall the game is pretty good, and there is really good replay value here. Like if there are multiple endings in the game based on like what characters you choose, what choices you make in dialogue. There's multiple endings, so if you got one ending, you like the game, you want a different one, you're kind of disappointed with the ending, you can go back and you can play it again and try to get the ending that you want, which I think is good for games like this. Kind of gives them a little more longevity.
Yeah, sure.
All right, anything else to add for 3 before we move on to 4?
No, let's go on to 4.
All right. Well, Persona 4 was released in 2008 for the PS2. It also got re-released for the Vita. It's called Persona 4 Golden. Pretty similar, just looks much better on the Vita. They changed a few things,
Yeah, I've never
but
played that one.
yeah, that's the one I really put time into, is the Vita one. It's definitely better, but again, they're more or less the same game, so you're not really missing much if you have the PS2. Well, this is also like $10 on the Vita, so either way, if you have a Vita or you have a PS2, get one of these versions. It doesn't matter. You'll have
It's
fun
Atlas,
either way.
right? Atlas
Yep.
produced. Yeah.
Yep. All right, so in this one, we got the same kind of theme. You're a transfer student, just coming to the new town. But in the beginning of this one, somebody gets murdered. So
Right.
you
It's all a
basically,
big, like, murder mystery in this.
yeah, that's definitely the feel in this main story. In this one, like someone gets murdered, and then you get kind of sucked into the TV, which sounds weird, but you find out that basically people are getting trapped in the TV, and if you don't get them out before like the month is over, they'll die in the TV, and that's kind of what the murder mystery is. So you bring some party members along with you, go into TV and try to save these people. I think that the characters in 4 are more interesting than they were in 3. I just think they're more likable. They have more personality, more backstory. You're kind of like, you kind of get attached to those characters.
It's all kept very lighthearted, even though there's
Yes.
so much. Like, it's just as dark as Persona 3, but it's presented so much more
I
colorfully.
think that Atlas was like, listen, we made Persona 3, where you shot yourself in the head. It was weird. It was really depressing. Let's kind of lighten it up a little bit and change 4. I think that's what they kind of did. And that's why you got like characters like Teddy, your mascot, who's kind of goofy, but it still has that dark overtone, which I think is why a lot of people like the game. But
they went with that like poppy. They try to go with that pop style more with that than the dark anime, basically style.
Yeah, I think the pacing is better in this game too. Like I mentioned in 3, you're kind of just waiting for something to happen. In 4, there's kind of like always something happening. Like you could finish early, and then you're kind of waiting around a little bit. But overall, I think more events happen at appropriate times. Like you don't feel like you're waiting.
Though.
Well, yeah, there's something worth mentioning. Is it's a 3-hour opening in this game.
At least.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably around 3 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, I think average is like 3 hours.
If you want to read everything, it takes forever to just get into it.
Yeah, I'd say it takes a little too long for you to see combat for the first time.
Yeah, definitely. They went too much. That's too much.
But then again, I'm not too interested in story in the games all the time. Like I usually if it's a decent game, I'll get into it. But usually, I'm not that into it. In this one, I was I honestly didn't notice it was a 3-hour opening until you started playing and mentioned it to me. I was like, "Oh, really? I guess you're right." You know?
Yeah, it was like all night. I thought I was gonna, start playing, but no, I was basically watching a movie.
Yeah. But again,
I kept going.
Yeah, I'm usually not that into. I know you're not, especially into stories that often.
Something about Persona I just really enjoy. There's movies I've never seen them, but
oh really? I didn't know that. All right, another improvement over 3 is you can choose to control all of your party members. So
which I don't.
Oh really? I definitely do. I do every time.
Nah, I think they can kind of take care of it.
Oh well, in 3, like I mentioned before, you can't control party members. They just kind of do what you want. In 4, you can set them to auto, or you can choose what they do. I think I kind of tend to undergrind. Like you don't grind enough. So like I get to the boss, and I've already had trouble on the monsters on the last 2 floors of the dungeon. So I think I kind of have to take control in order to like kind of get through it. Like I'm making sure I heal the right person. If I miss one turn of healing, I'm wiped. So maybe you're grinding more and you're having an easier time. Maybe I'm just underleveled.
And then you grind. You can skip the battle basically by just auto doing it really fast.
Yeah,
I do that a lot.
Yeah, I usually don't. I kind of play through. I enjoy that combat, but
yeah, it's too basic. It's very basic combat.
It is basic. There's also something worth mentioning. In Persona 3, weakness, and in Persona 4, weaknesses are very important. Like if the monster is weak to fire and you use a fire attack, they'll get knocked down, and then it lets your party basically all rush that monster at once and do like massive damage. Right? In 3,
it's hard to figure out what they're weak to though.
Well, in 3 they don't tell you the weakness. In 4, anytime you can view the monster's like stats, and if you use an attack on it in a previous battle or this battle, it will show you the weakness chart. So if you want to take your time and you want to plan out your whole turn, you can do it. Like there's no time limit there, so you can look at every monster's weakness every turn, see what moves they're weak to, and kind of like plan out. Okay, Chie is going to use this fire move, and then my main character is going to use this one, which will knock them down. You kind of view that and take it at your own time if you want to. Or you can just kind of power grind and go through it.
I don't think they tell you like all those stats though. You analyze them with Teddy, I think, in 4, but they don't tell you.
No,
everything.
they will tell if you. All right, the first time you fight a monster, it will show you nothing, right? If you use fire on it, now fire will be added to that chart. It will tell you if fire is weak or not. So if you fought the monster, so you could just kind of use them all the attacks and figure it out, and then like you don't have to remember. You can always just view it.
I see. I thought you meant that they would just tell you.
No.
Okay, my bad.
No.
Yeah,
if you've used it, it will show you after.
Yeah.
And you do fight the same monsters in the dungeon over and over. So
yeah, it's very useful.
Like every game, but yeah. All right. instead of being tired in this one, they kind of made a different mechanic. They got rid of that. Okay, I've done 10 battles, now my character's weak and I have to go back. Instead, you have basically mana or SP, it's called in this game. Um, since these weaknesses and stuff like that we've been talking about are very important, you basically have to be using SP for like every other attack. Some characters have decent melee, but others really don't. So really, you're using a lot of mana, and that's what kind of keeps you from going further in the game without going back. And on top of that, there are some recovery items available, but there aren't too many. They're not easy to come by.
I think they're very expensive. I think that was
They
the
are.
thing.
They are very expensive, and they don't drop often.
No.
Stuff like that. So I think
It's
that's a
kinda the
better
same
way to
mechanic
do it, though.
almost.
It is,
Yeah, it's better,
but
it's very similar.
it's manageable. In Persona 3, it's
Yeah.
not manageable. Like there's a monster that you can't get past them without fighting him. It's gonna make you weaker. I
Yeah.
noticed when I played 3, I was kind of like trying to sneak by more because I'm like, oh, I can only do so many battles.
Yeah, definitely, you're right.
And I didn't really like that. I think that this was definitely an improvement in 4. Um, well, another improvement in 4 is when you're doing social links outside of combat, like you did in the last one. If you're about to get an upgrade social link, it will tell you before you go and spend time in that event. So, like, if a character's like, hey, would you like to go to the ramen shop and hang out? And then it will say in parentheses, like, you think the social link might develop soon. You're like, oh, if I go here, I'm going to get the next level. It's worth doing. Or if it doesn't say that, you can be like, I'll take my chances and try to do a different event where I can get an upgrade. It's not huge to the game, but I think it was a nice touch. Yeah, you might not have noticed, but I thought it was a nice subtle touch that improved the game a little bit. And like Persona 3, there are multiple endings in this game. So if you do like the game and you beat it, you can kind of go back, and there's still more to do. You can do different social links. You can join, like in the game, you join clubs to do social links. You can join different clubs, and that will give you a different ending. So there is some replay value
locks
here.
you out of some stuff, so
What was that?
it kind of locks you out. If you join one club, you
Mhm.
can't join another. So
Yeah, so you could definitely go back and do something differently. And I think if you manage to get through the game, I think it's kind of likely that you would go back. I think it's that good. You know, or go
yeah,
back
just the
next year, you know?
characters and story. Yeah,
Yeah.
all very intriguing.
All right, well, I think we're almost out of time here. So why don't we wrap this up? Would you like to
Cool.
add anything else about Persona or
No, I think we covered it all.
yeah. All right.
Pretty excited for 5, yeah.
All right, so come join us next week. The game of the week for next week will be Rogue Galaxy for the PlayStation 2. Kind of a hidden gem, in my opinion, on the system. Not many people know about it. I'm pretty excited to play it. I haven't played it before. So, yeah, I can't wait for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So please check out JustRPG.com for tons of game reviews, news articles, editorials. We add content throughout the week. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at JustRPG for updates, and feel free to message us if you'd like to suggest topics for next week's podcast. Also, make sure to follow us on other social media sites such as Pinterest and Tumblr. We put, again, our collection blogs on there, so if you're interested in collecting or just curious to see what it's like, make sure to check us out on social media. And those links will be in the description below. Well, thanks for joining us. It was fun. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.